They warned me in 100 little ways. In the cashier's tight smile when I counted coins. In the neighbor's sigh when my baby cried at 3 a.m. In the guidance counselor's careful voice, maybe take a break from school. In my ex's last text, good luck. Even in the mirror, where a girl with swollen eyes and chapped lips tried to pretend she wasn't terrified. They told me I would fail, and for a while, I did. I failed the morning I missed the bus to the clinic, and pretended it didn't matter. I failed the night the bottle slipped from my hand and shattered on the tile while the baby wailed and the pot boiled over. I failed when rent was due and I paid half, then hid the notice under a stack of unopened envelopes as if paper couldn't catch fire when ignored. I failed when I showed up late to work, twice, and my manager's face turned from worry to weariness to something like resignation. We need reliability, he said gently, which was a polite way of telling me I wasn't it. I nodded like a grown-up and cried in the bathroom like a child. Failure crept in like fog, soft at first, then everywhere. Laundry multiplied. Dishes formed small rebellions in the sink. The baby's cries fused with the kettle's whistle, and the phone's demand for payments, until every sound felt like an accusation. I lived in 10-minute segments. 10 minutes to get dressed, 10 to find the missing shoe, 10 to convince myself I could make it to the bus stop before the sky turned against me. I lived on caffeine, adrenaline, and a stubbornness that looked like strength from far away, and like panic up close. People love to say, ask for help, as if help were a light switch, and not a lock you have to pick with trembling hands. I tried. I really did. I asked my mother, who sent what she could, and apologies for what she couldn't. I asked friends who answered with emojis and so proud of you, and then disappeared into their weekends. I asked the universe with small, tired prayers at the edge of sleep. Some nights, silence answered. Some nights, a baby's breath on my neck was the only yes I got. I told myself I was doing my best. Then I remembered my best used to look different. Essays turned in on time, hair brushed, laughter that wasn't forced. Now my best was enough diapers for tomorrow and one more story before bed, even if my voice shakes. I hated that the world was right about me. I hated that the girl who once underlined chapters and color-coded hope had become a woman who measured worth in ounces of formula and hours slept. The worst night was not the loudest one. It was the quiet one. The night the power flickered and then went. The apartment sinking into a darkness that felt personal. The baby startled and then whimpered. The kind of small sound that breaks you because it trusts you to fix what you can't afford to fix. I pressed my phone's flashlight against the ceiling to make a fake moon and whispered a story I made up as I went. My voice shook, but the baby calmed, and for a moment, I believed I was enough again. When the light died, I held my child and stared at the cold window and thought the ugliest thought I've ever had. Maybe they were right about me. Shame grows fast in the dark. It turns every memory against you. I remembered the teacher who said I was full of promise, and the way the word promise can mean both a future and a debt. I remembered his mother's eyes the last time she looked at me. Measuring, thinning, done. I remembered how easy it is to leave and how hard it is to stay, and how I had chosen the hard thing without knowing the cost. I wish I could tell you the turning point was glorious. A check in the mail, a miracle call, a door flung open. It wasn't. It was smaller than that. Small enough to miss if you weren't looking. It was a crayon. The next morning, with the power still out and my hope as thin as the light under the door, my daughter sat on the floor with a dull red crayon and drew on the back of the overdue notice I hadn't thrown away. A circle for a face, sticks for arms, a square body wearing a cape that trailed off the page. She lifted it up with both hands, proud as sunrise. "Mom," she said, "this is you. You're flying." I laughed, one broken sound, and then I didn't, because there I was, not pretty, not perfect, not even symmetrical, but flying, at least to the only eyes that mattered. The cape was crooked and the smile was wrong, but the arms were wide, wider than fear. The drawing didn't give me money or hours of sleep. It gave me something else, a mirror I could stand to look into. They told me I would fail, and for a while I did. I failed loudly and quietly, publicly and alone, in ways that could be tallied and in ways that only I will ever know. But that morning, with a crayon cape version of myself in my hand and a child waiting to be fed, I understood a different kind of math. Failure can be a floor, not a verdict, a place to stand up from. I taped the drawing to the fridge with a piece of tired tape and made 3 decisions. First, I would write everything down, every bill, every bus schedule, every shift, so panic would stop winning by surprise. Second, I would ask for help and keep asking, even if the first door closed and the second and the third. Humility was cheaper than eviction. Third, I would forgive yesterday's version of me by making today's version useful. One phone call, one form, one load of laundry, one breath at a time. This is not the part where I say everything got easy. It didn't. The world kept its sharp corners. People kept their opinions. I kept waking up too early and falling asleep too late. But the story bent. The line that had been plummeting leveled, then inched, then climbed. I learned to stack small wins like bricks. A full fridge, a paid bill, a neighbor's number saved as lifeline, a lullaby learned by heart. They told me I would fail as a single mother. They were right. Until I learned that failing isn't the same as stopping. Until I learned that flying sometimes looks like staying. Until a red crayon cape reminded me that to the ones who depend on you, getting up again is a superpower. And this is the story of what happened after I picked up that drawing, after I decided to build a life from the floor up, one stubborn, ordinary miracle at a time, before the whispers, before the judgment, before the failures people love to measure. I was just a girl with dreams that felt bigger than my small town. I wanted to study, to work, to build something that mattered. My notebooks were filled with plans, doodles of apartments in the city, lists of books I wanted to read. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't naive. I just believed in love, the kind of love that makes you think you can handle whatever life throws at you. When I became pregnant, the plans shifted. Suddenly, the future wasn't measured in essays and job applications, but in doctor's appointments and baby clothes. People warned me even then. Teachers tilted their heads and said, "You're so bright, don't throw it away." Friends offered quick hugs but pulled back when the reality of diapers and bottles made my life less exciting than theirs. My ex promised he'd stay, but promises are fragile things. The first time he missed an appointment, I told myself he was busy. The second time, I told myself he was scared. By the third time, I stopped telling myself anything at all. When the baby came, I thought love would be enough. I thought if I poured every ounce of myself into my child, the rest would somehow fall into place. For a moment, it even felt true. I held her tiny hand and whispered, "It's you and me now." But soon reality broke through. The long nights, the bills that piled faster than I could open them, the friends who stopped calling, the partner who slipped away until he was nothing but silence. That's when the voices grew louder, not always spoken out loud, but heavy in the air. At the clinic, single mothers usually struggle. At the grocery store, "How old are you again?" In family conversations that ended with, "We'll help when we can, but you need to figure this out." The message was clear. They didn't believe in me. And the worst part was, I started to believe them too. Failure came in waves. The first was exhaustion, the kind that eats away at your mind until you forget simple things. I showed up late to work because the baby wouldn't stop crying. I burned dinner because I fell asleep on the couch. I missed the bus because my hands were too full carrying both my child and the bags we needed for the day. People shook their heads, muttering, "She's not cut out for this," as if I couldn't hear. But I did. I always did. The second wave was financial. Money was never enough. Rent notices showed up like clockwork, reminding me of the ground slipping beneath my feet. Groceries became a balancing act of needs versus survival. Formula or electricity, diapers or bus fare, every choice felt like a failure, because choosing one meant losing another. I learned to count coins until my fingers ached, to skip meals so she could eat, to smile through the humiliation of returning items at the checkout line. The third wave was isolation. Friends drifted, family was busy, and I found myself alone more often than not. I scrolled through photos of people my age traveling, celebrating, living lives untouched by responsibility. Meanwhile, I was trapped in a cycle of feeding, rocking, working, crying, repeating. Loneliness sat beside me at night like an unwelcome shadow. Some days it felt heavier than poverty. But the most brutal wave was the doubt, the cruel little voice inside me that whispered, "They were right. You can't do this. You're failing her. You're failing yourself." It was the voice that grew louder when my daughter got sick, and I didn't know what to do. When the landlord knocked on the door. When the power flickered out. Doubt became my constant companion, turning every small mistake into evidence against me. And yet, even in the middle of that storm, there were moments of light. My daughter's first laugh, bubbling out of her tiny chest like music. The way she reached for me in a crowded room, choosing me above everyone else. The quiet peace of watching her sleep. her little face free from the worries that kept me awake. Those moments reminded me why I kept going, even when I felt like I was crumbling. The turning point, the red crayon cape, came later, but the introduction to my journey was defined by this tension, the world telling me I was failing, and me slowly, painfully realizing that sometimes I was. Not because I didn't love enough, not because I didn't try hard enough, but because single motherhood is heavy, and no one prepares you for the way it pulls at every part of you. Your body, your mind, your hope. I wish I could say I was brave from the beginning. I wasn't. I stumbled. I broke down. I hid overdue bills and forced smiles. I believed the voices that said I wasn't enough. But each morning, when my daughter reached out her tiny arms, I got up anyway. Not out of courage, but out of love. Not because I knew how, but because she needed me to try. That's the truth about those early days. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't strong. I was a girl learning, failing, surviving one fragile day at a time. The world told me I would fail as a single mother, and at first I did. But what they didn't know, and what I was about to learn, was that failure can be the soil where resilience grows. That broken beginnings don't mean broken endings. And that's where my story truly begins. With a young woman who everyone doubted, including herself, standing at the edge of collapse, and slowly, painfully, learning that even in failure, there is room to rise. Failure wasn't a single moment, it was a season. It stretched across weeks and months, creeping into every corner of my life. Some days it looked like an empty fridge, other days like unopened envelopes stacked in the drawer, their red lettering screaming past due. Sometimes it was quieter, like the way my shoulders slumped when another neighbor shook her head, or the way I avoided eye contact at the clinic so I wouldn't have to see the pity in people's faces. Money was the sharpest edge of that season. My part-time job paid just enough to keep us on the brink of survival, but never enough to pull us out of it. Every paycheck was already spoken for before it hit my account. Rent, utilities, formula, diapers. By the time the bills were covered, if they were, there was nothing left for me. I patched shoes with tape, wore the same faded jeans, skipped meals more often than I admitted. At night, I sometimes went to bed hungry, whispering to myself, "It doesn't matter. She ate. She's full. That's what counts." But hunger wasn't the only thing that gnawed at me. Isolation was its own kind of famine. Friends who once promised to stick by me slowly drifted. Their conversations turned toward college classes, parties, travel plans, things I couldn't afford in time or money. When they texted less, I told myself they were busy. When the invitations stopped completely, I told myself I didn't want to go anyway. But the truth was, I sat alone on too many Friday nights, scrolling through their photos and wishing I was still part of their world. The loneliness made me vulnerable to every cruel voice around me. People love to judge what they don't understand. At the grocery store, I felt eyes on me when I paid with assistance benefits. At the bus stop, I overheard whispers. "She's too young. What did she think would happen?" At the clinic, one nurse sighed and muttered under her breath. Another statistic. Those words stuck like barbs under my skin, making me question every choice I had made. Sleep deprivation didn't help. My daughter woke often, needing bottles, comfort, a hand to soothe her cries. I stumbled through nights half awake, then dragged myself to work in the mornings. Exhaustion blurred my days into one long stretch of survival. Mistakes multiplied. Burned dinners, missed buses, forgotten appointments. Each mistake became another tally in the column of failure, proof for the world, and myself, that I wasn't cut out for this. The worst battles weren't outside, though. They were inside me. Guilt was relentless. Every time my daughter outgrew clothes and I couldn't replace them right away, guilt whispered, "You're not providing enough." Every time she cried, and I didn't have the energy to soothe her instantly, guilt hissed, "You're not patient enough." Every time she reached for someone else, my mother, a kind neighbor, I thought, she deserves someone better than me. Fear was its accomplice. Fear of eviction, fear of losing my job, fear of getting sick because there was no backup plan, no safety net. Fear that I was ruining not just my own life, but hers. Fear that the people who said I'd fail were prophets, and that my daughter would grow up resenting me for proving them right. One night, the conflict reached its peak. My daughter had a fever, her little body burning against my chest. The clinic was closed, the ER too far without a car, and I had no money for a cab. I rocked her, whispered prayers, and pressed cool cloths to her forehead. I cried silently, terrified that if her fever spiked higher, I would have no way to help her. The fear hollowed me out, left me shaking. In that moment, the voices that told me I wasn't enough felt like truth carved in stone. But even in the worst conflict, there were flashes of light. Like the time my daughter laughed so hard at a silly face, I made that the sound filled the entire room and drowned out every doubt, at least for a moment. Or the day a stranger at the bus stop handed me a pack of diapers and said, "You're doing a good job, don't forget that." Small things, but they were oxygen in a suffocating season. Still, the cycle of struggle was relentless. Work, childcare, bills, judgment, guilt. It spun around me like a storm, and I was always in the eye of it. I often wondered if this was what failure felt like permanently, if this was all there would ever be. The world had told me I would fail as a single mother, and for a long time, they were right. What no one told me, though, was that conflict can also be a crucible, that in the fire of doubt and exhaustion, something unbreakable was forming, that failure wasn't an ending, but a beginning I couldn't see yet. Failure wasn't a single blow. It was a slow leak. It hissed through the cracks of my days until everything felt deflated. My budget, my patience, my belief that I could do this. I woke each morning to a checklist that already outran me. Bottles to sterilize, a bus to catch, a shift to beg for, a notice to ignore. Even victories lasted the length of a breath. Paid one bill, 2 more arrived. Cooked dinner, the baby spit it up and the sink clogged. Folded laundry, the sky opened and soaked the line. It was as if the world had decided to test every seam I had. Money defined the edges of my fear. I learned the exact price of formula down to the cent, the cost per diaper, which stores honored double coupons, and which cashiers didn't argue if a barcode wouldn't scan. I stood in grocery aisles doing mental math, subtracting cereal to afford soap, putting back apples to keep bus fare. When the total went over, I pretended I'd grabbed the wrong brand and returned items with a smile that felt like cardboard. One Tuesday, I counted coins into the cashier's palm while my daughter tugged at the hem of my coat. A man behind us sighed loudly, checked his watch, and muttered, "Some people shouldn't have kids." I flushed so hot I thought I would faint. That night, I ate the heel of a loaf and told myself I wasn't hungry. Rent was a monthly cliff. I brought the landlord envelopes with partial payments and promises I hated hearing myself make. Friday, I swear. Next week, for sure. He drummed his fingers on the doorframe and said, "This building can't run on promises." I wanted to tell him my life couldn't either, but neither of us had time for poetry. When the pink notice showed up, I ironed it flat and slid it under a stack of coloring pages. My daughter's smile in red crayon on top of my panic, like a bandage on a broken bone. Utilities were roulette. A shut-off warning from the electric company became a kitchen decoration, taped beside my daughter's first stick figure drawing of me with a lopsided cape. When the lights did go out, the apartment became a shadow box of the life I wanted and the life I had. I made a moon with my phone's flashlight, read stories from memory, and heated bottles over a tea candle snuffed and lit, praying the smoke alarm stayed silent. When the power returned the next day after a frantic call and a partial payment, I cried in relief so hard my daughter asked, "Mommy, are we safe?" I kissed her forehead and lied, "Yes," because sometimes kindness is a temporary fiction. Judgment found me in public places and in paperwork. At the clinic reception desk, a nurse asked, "Father's name?" with her pen hovering. When I said, "It's just me," her eyebrows did what her mouth didn't. In the benefits office, a woman in a navy cardigan pushed forms toward me with the brisk mercy of someone who has seen everything and can give nothing extra. Documentation, signatures, proof of residence, proof of income, proof of motherhood, proof of failure. Both seemed implied. I brought every scrap I owned in a ripped manila folder, paper-clipped like armor. The social worker who finally called my name said, "You're not alone." And I almost believed her because she looked me in the eyes when she said it. Sleep deprivation rewired my brain. I lived in 90-minute intervals dictated by a baby's stomach and a toddler's appetite for attention. Nights bled into dawns. Coffee became a religion and showers a rumor. I put milk in the cabinet and measured rice with a tablespoon because the measuring cup was in the sink and I couldn't face it. I forgot birthdays, then remembered at 2 a.m. and wrote apologies that read like confessions. On the bus, I nodded off with my cheek against the window and woke to my daughter patting my shoulder, whispering, "It's okay, Mommy," like she'd been practicing the line. Childcare was a puzzle with missing pieces. My mother took what hours she could between her own shifts. A neighbor named Alma adopted the role of emergency aunt. And once, a friend's cousin watched my daughter and fed her cake for lunch. I learned to pack a backpack like a lifeboat. Extra clothes, snacks, wipes, Band-Aids, a paper with my number in 3 different pockets. When a sitter canceled 20 minutes before my shift, I wheeled the stroller to a payphone and called everyone twice, and then my manager, who exhaled disappointment into the receiver. "We need reliability," he said. I swallowed the heat in my throat and said, "So do I." Work was a stage I performed on with shaking hands. I smiled at customers whose lives smelled like fabric softener and thyme, counted change with swollen fingers, shelved canned tomatoes into neat pyramids that collapsed if you breathed wrong. A coworker named Tasha became my unofficial spotter, lifting the heaviest boxes and sliding me granola bars without commentary. Another coworker kept a tally of my tardies like it was sport. "Again?" he'd sing, and I'd remind myself not to break in public. When my hours were cut, for your own good, I thanked my boss out loud and cursed luck under my breath. Fewer hours meant safer feet and hungrier children. Loneliness was a roommate. It ate beside me at the table after the kids were asleep. It climbed into bed and watched the ceiling. It stood with me at the window while snow made a quiet of the world I couldn't afford to enter. My phone learned to stay silent. Friends' lives glowed from screens. Neon nights, bright mornings, rooms without toys on the floor. I double-tapped photos like a person sending postcards from a different continent. When a message did come, "Let's catch up soon," soon meant never, and I tried hard to resent plans instead of people. The harshest voice lived in my own mouth. It knew where to aim. When my daughter's shoes grew tight and I waited till payday to replace them, it hissed, "You're failing." When she tugged my sleeve and I said, "1 minute," and meant 10, it accused me of stinginess with love. When I opened the fridge and found condiments and light, it wrote headlines. I learned to answer back, softly. "We're tired, not useless. We're broke, not broken. We're learning." Some nights that worked. Other nights I fell asleep mid-rebuttal with my hand in my child's hair. Health concerns turned ordinary days into cliffs. The first time my daughter's cough deepened into something rubbery and mean, I put my ear to her chest and heard fear. The clinic's line rang and rang. I bundled her in a blanket and walked to urgent care, boots slipping on slush, the stroller a plow. A nurse listened, looked, and said, "Viral, fluids, rest." I wanted a prescription for certainty, a shot of guarantee. Instead, I got 2 lollipops and a bill with numbers that looked like an accusation. On the way home, a woman stopped us, pressed a pair of tiny mittens into my hand and said, "My boy outgrew these. Do you want them?" For the rest of winter, those mittens were proof that kindness still shopped on our street. Paperwork became its own job. There were forms for housing assistance, childcare subsidies, food benefits, and none of them spoke the same language. Each renewal carried a threat. Failure to respond may result in termination of services, as if bureaucracy were a babysitter you had to flatter to keep. I kept a calendar on the inside of my cupboard with deadlines in thick marker, and when I met one on time, I stuck a star next to it the way teachers used to stick them on good work. Adult gold stars are scarce. I made my own. Church was a mixed chorus. Some Sundays I sat in the back and absorbed songs like a person warming her hands at a fire. Other Sundays, sermons about family values scraped me raw. A woman named Ruth squeezed my shoulder as she passed and slipped a grocery card into my palm without ceremony. "You're doing holy work," she whispered. I didn't feel holy. I felt human and held, and sometimes that's the same thing in disguise. There were days that looked like cinematic failure, a bowl of oatmeal upended onto the floor like modern art, a tantrum in the cereal aisle, a stroller wheel that popped loose at the exact intersection where cars don't care. I learned to carry zip ties and snacks. I learned to say, "We're okay," out loud in the middle of chaos, and discovered that sometimes the body believes the mouth. I tried to return to school once, stacking 2 evening classes against my schedule like Tetris. The first week, I took notes with a pen that left ink on my fingers and hope on the page. The second week, the sitter canceled. The third, my daughter had a fever. The fourth, I sat outside the classroom door listening to a lecture about resilience and cried because the word was suddenly too heavy. I withdrew and promised myself not now wasn't never. I wrote soon on a sticky note and used it as a bookmark in a used textbook I refused to sell. People say, "Ask for help," like it's a staircase. It's more like a maze. I asked anyway. I asked my mother for a weekend morning so I could sleep. She brought pancakes and told my daughter a story about a girl who outran a storm. I asked Alma next door to watch the baby while I interviewed for a cleaning job. She taught me how to fold a fitted sheet for free. I asked a caseworker if there was any way to speed a list that never moved. She said, "I can't promise," and then called 2 days later with a slot at a subsidized daycare 3 bus stops away. That day, I cried in a bathroom stall, and then washed my face and started a gratitude list in the Notes app on my phone. 1. Daycare. 2. Mittens. 3. Moon made from a phone light. 4. Red crayon cape. Shame and pride wrestled constantly. Pride told me to do it all myself. Shame told me I already wasn't. Between them stood the practical voice that kept us alive. Take the help. Say thank you. Keep receipts. I learned to bless small mercies like they were sacraments. Hand-me-down coats. A neighbor's Wi-Fi password. An extra shift when someone called out. I learned to praise ordinary miracles. A full tank. A full fridge. A full night's sleep. Rare, worth framing. Not every cruelty was external. Sometimes people weaponized compassion. "I don't know how you do it," said with a tone that meant I wouldn't. "If you'd made different choices," said with a sigh shaped like a finger. I learned the art of the nod and the boundary. We're doing our best. Period. Full stop. No room for debate. The conflict inside me orbited one question. What if they're right about me? What if my love couldn't compensate for my lack of time, money, or the other pair of arms that didn't tuck my daughter in at night? What if the statistics lined up their little soldiers and marched them straight through our front door? On the worst nights, I rehearsed apologies to a future child. I tried so hard. I'm sorry it wasn't enough. And then she'd wake, climb onto my chest, and fall asleep there, as if her body were writing a rebuttal. You are enough to me, right now. Then came the week that folded all the strands into a knot. The daycare closed for 3 days because a pipe burst. My boss threatened to cut my remaining hours if I missed another shift. My daughter spiked a fever and vomited into my hands while we waited for the bus. I carried her home under my coat, my shirt clinging to me, my hair damp with the smell of the life I chose. At the top of the stairs, Alma opened her door, took one look, and said, "Give her to me. You shower." I stood under hot water and remembered what warmth felt like across the whole body. When I came out, my girl was asleep on Alma's couch, with a cool washcloth on her forehead, and an old cartoon playing low. "Sit," Alma said, handing me soup. I cried because sometimes safety tastes like salt and chicken. That night, after the fever settled and the apartment exhaled, I gathered the bills, the bus schedules, the daycare forms, and the notebook where I kept my life stitched together. I drew 3 columns on a page. Non-negotiable, rent, formula, diapers. Flexible, electric, phone. Optional, everything else. I wrote phone trees for emergencies. Alma, Mom, Ruth, Tasha. I listed numbers for clinics with night hours. I wrote a script for asking my boss for mornings instead of nights. I'll make the opening shift sing. Give me 2 weeks. If I don't deliver, cut me. I practiced it out loud until my voice stopped shaking. The world didn't soften because I made a chart, but something inside me did. The storm still raged, money short, shifts scarce, sleep thinner than winter light, but I had a map, however hand-drawn. The voices that told me I would fail still spoke. I learned to make them stand at the back of the room. I taped the red crayon drawing back onto the fridge with fresh tape. My daughter's version of me still wore a cape. The smile was still crooked. The arms were still wide. For a long time, they were right about me. I was failing. In public, in private, in measurable and invisible ways. But conflict was a crucible. Every judgment burned away something that didn't matter. Every bill taught me a number I could respect. Every night alone taught me the size of my love. I didn't stop breaking. I learned how to build while broken. I wasn't out of the woods. Not yet. Not close. But I knew where the trees ended and the path began. And that knowledge, the first real one I owned since the day everything changed, was the beginning of my until. The breaking point didn't announce itself with fireworks. It came disguised as an ordinary evening, the kind where exhaustion stacked itself quietly on my shoulders, one small weight at a time, until I could barely breathe. The dishes were piled in the sink, the rent notice sat on the counter, and my daughter was burning with another fever. The apartment smelled of damp laundry and reheated pasta. It was just another night in a long line of nights, where survival felt like both an achievement and a prison. But that night, the cracks widened, and I nearly fell through them. She was coughing in her sleep, her tiny body curling into mine as if I could shield her from sickness with my arms alone. I pressed my hand to her forehead, too hot, and panic began its steady climb up my chest. I had no car, no money for a taxi, and the bus schedule mocked me with its long intervals. The clinic was closed. The ER felt impossible. My brain played out worst-case scenarios: seizures, hospital beds, me unable to pay the bill. I clutched her tighter, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. That's when the voices came back louder than ever. "You're failing her. They were right about you. She deserves better. You can't do this." I sat on the floor of our dark apartment, rocking back and forth with my child in my arms, and let the tears fall. I was so tired of scraping, of begging, of pretending to be strong when inside I was unraveling. For the first time, I let the thought in fully. Maybe they were right. Maybe I can't do this. Maybe I should give up. But give up how? The world doesn't take applications for surrender. No one comes to rescue the mother who decides she's too tired. My options weren't exits. They were walls. And yet, in that moment, the idea of failing forever seemed almost like relief. No more fighting battles I was destined to lose. I remember staring at the overdue bills scattered on the floor. The red letters blurred through my tears, and I whispered out loud, "I can't." Just that. 2 words. I can't. My daughter stirred, her small hand brushing against my cheek as if to catch the words before they landed. She didn't know what I'd said. She didn't understand failure, or shame, or rent notices. She only knew me as Mommy, and in her sleep, with her fever still raging, she sighed and whispered something too. Mama. It shattered me. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was ordinary. A child calling for her mother, the one person she believed could make it all better. In her eyes, I wasn't the girl who had fallen behind on rent, or the woman whispered about at the bus stop, or the statistics stamped on forms. In her eyes, I was enough. In her eyes, I was flying, even if I felt like I was sinking. That was the first shift. But the second came the next morning, when my toddler, barely old enough to draw shapes, picked up a red crayon and sketched me onto the back of an overdue notice. A circle face, lines for arms, and a cape that trailed off the page. She handed it to me with pride. "Mommy," she said, "you fly." I held the paper in my trembling hands and stared. To her, I wasn't failing. To her, I was a superhero. I didn't feel like one. My bank account said otherwise. My sleepless eyes said otherwise. The world said otherwise. But the picture said something else. I was still here. I hadn't quit. I hadn't abandoned her, even when everything inside me screamed to collapse. That was the climax. Not a miracle, not a lottery win, not a sudden rescue. It was a child's faith holding up a broken woman, a red crayon cape taped onto the fridge like armor. It was realizing that even when I failed in 100 ways, I had succeeded in the one way that mattered most. I stayed. I kept showing up. But the battle didn't end there. Clarity doesn't cancel reality. The bills didn't disappear. The cough didn't vanish. The judgment didn't stop. What changed was the way I faced them. That night had shown me the worst version of myself, the version that believed quitting was an option. And surviving it showed me something else, that I could stand in the rubble of failure and still build. The fever broke 2 days later, after countless cold cloths and whispered prayers. My daughter woke weak but smiling, and I exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. I looked around the apartment, the chaos, the unpaid notices, the laundry, and for once, I didn't see shame. I saw proof that I had endured, proof that I had fought, proof that survival, however messy, was still survival. From that moment on, I started doing something small but radical. I wrote things down, every payment made, every meal cooked, every kindness received, not to shame myself for what I lacked, but to remind myself of what I had. The notebook filled slowly with small victories. Rent, half paid but paid. Neighbor dropped off mittens. Baby's fever broke. Survived another day. Each line was a declaration. I may fail 100 times, but I rise 101. And when the voices returned, and they always did, I would open that notebook and point to the evidence. Here is proof that I am not just failing. Here is proof that I am learning, enduring, growing. The red crayon drawing stayed taped to the fridge, the cape crooked but bright, my daughter's belief staring at me every time I felt doubt creep in. The climax of my story wasn't a single night. It was a decision that followed me into every morning afterward. The decision to stop measuring myself by the world's standards of success and start measuring myself by my children's. Did they eat? Did they feel loved? Did they believe in me, even when I didn't believe in myself? If the answer was yes, then I wasn't failing, no matter how loudly the world claimed otherwise. Still, the memory of that night, the fever, the darkness, the whispered "I can't," stayed with me. It became both my warning and my anchor. I never wanted to return there, but I also never wanted to forget it, because it taught me the sharpest truth of all. Failure isn't final unless you stop trying. And so I didn't stop. They told me I would fail as a single mother. For a long time, they were right. But on the night when giving up seemed easier than holding on, my child's faith saved me. Her voice in the dark, her crayon cape on the fridge, they were my turning point. The climax of a story not about defeat, but about resilience being born in the ashes of despair. I didn't become stronger overnight. I didn't suddenly have more money, more sleep, more help. But I had something better. Proof that I could survive my lowest moment and still stand. And that knowledge, that unshakable, red crayon truth, was what began to carry me from failure into the fragile, stubborn hope of until. I didn't wake up one day to a brand new life. Change came the way dawn does in winter. Slow, pale, almost shy, so gentle you don't notice it until you realize you're no longer standing in the dark. After the red crayon night, I started building our days differently. Not bigger, not louder, just steadier. I wrote things down and did them in the order I could. Pay this piece, call this person, ask this neighbor, cook this meal. The list was never finished, but I stopped treating the unfinished as failure. It became a rhythm, a way to move forward when my feelings tried to drag me back. The first real turn wasn't money, it was mornings. I asked my boss for the opening shift with the script I'd practiced. Give me 2 weeks, and I'll make your bakery case sing. He raised an eyebrow and said, "Sing, huh?" 2 weeks later, I was the one flipping on the lights, setting out warm bread and counting a till that balanced. It didn't fix everything, but it gave us predictability, and predictability is a kind of wealth no one teaches you to measure. Daycare opened when I clocked out. I walked there with coffee on my breath and a smile I didn't have to fake. My daughter ran to me with her arms wide, and the teacher said, "She talks about you like you're a superhero." I touched the folded paper in my bag, the red cape drawing, and said, "She's my artist." The second turn was permission, the kind I gave myself. I stopped apologizing for needing help and started treating help like a tool, not a verdict. Alma and I made a trade. I fixed her online forms. She watched my daughter when the bus betrayed me. Ruth from church taught me to batch cook on Sundays and slipped recipes into my coat pocket like secrets. Tasha showed me how to stretch a paycheck without stretching my soul. I kept a page in my notebook titled, "What We Have," mittens, a neighbor, a morning shift, a lullaby that never fails, a story we're still inside of. There were still bad days. A winter pipe burst and daycare closed again. The bus broke down in the rain. A stomach bug took our apartment hostage. But the floor under us had changed. We had a plan even when the plan was call 3 people and then cry for 5 minutes in the bathroom. I learned that resilience isn't about never breaking. It's about building a life where breaks are repairable. I made one more decision I didn't announce to anyone. Not now would grow into soon. I enrolled in a short evening course at the community center, basic bookkeeping, because numbers were the dragon I wanted to befriend. Alma watched my daughter on class nights. I repaid her in casseroles, babysitting, and thank you notes my daughter decorated with furious concentration. I studied after bedtime with my feet in warm socks and a pencil behind my ear, and when doubt knocked, I pointed at the fridge. A crooked smile, a cape, arms open wider than fear. The certificate didn't change the world, but it changed the way I moved through it. The store manager heard, then handed me the deposit log 1 week when the assistant called out. I balanced it. The next month, I covered inventory. 3 months later, I was offered a steadier position, fewer last-minute calls, more hours that landed where I could catch them. The raise was small on paper and enormous in our kitchen. I paid the electric bill before the red letters arrived and stood in the hallway just to watch the light switch work like a promise kept. They still talked. People always do. There were whispers when my ex appeared at the edge of a birthday party, awkward and late, with a toy that made too much noise. There were opinions about forgiveness, about child support, about what dignity demands. I kept my boundary a sentence long. Our door is for our child, not my wounds. Some days, that sentence felt too strong. Other days, not strong enough. Healing, I learned, is less like a finish line and more like tide. Coming in, going out, shaping rock into shore if you give it time. My daughter grew into her cape. One afternoon, I found her at the table drawing again. Stick figures upgrading to rectangles with eyelashes and shoes. "This is us," she said, "and this time I'm flying with you." She had drawn 2 capes, both wild and red, both trailing off the page. I taped it beside the first one. Together they looked like a before and an after with no shame between them, only motion. The biggest lesson hid in the smallest sentence, until they told me I would fail as a single mother. They were right, until I stopped measuring success by what I didn't have and started measuring it by what I could give, until I let the village be a verb, not a myth, until I chose plans over panic, requests over pride, forgiveness over a future I couldn't change, until I understood that my child's definition of enough fit my heart better than the world's. I still have lists. I still have late nights, early mornings, and floors to mop. The cape on the fridge is still crooked. But our home is louder now, in the good ways. We laugh at burnt pancakes and make new ones. We dance while the rice cooks. We read the library books twice, and then once more because someone asks with pleas and dimples. Failure still visits, uninvited and sure of itself. I make it take off its shoes at the door. It leaves sooner now. It understands this is not its address. On the night I almost said, "I can't," and meant it, my daughter answered with a simple word, "Mama." It wasn't a miracle. It was a reminder. I was already the person she needed me to be. Not perfect, not rested, not wealthy, but present. The red crayon only revealed what love had built while I wasn't looking. A woman who stands back up, a life stitched from small mercies, a child who believes in capes because she has only ever known arms that catch her. If you're listening from your own dim kitchen, with a notice on the counter and a pot boiling too hard, this is what I can give you. You may fail. For a while, you might even think they were right about you. Let failure be a floor. Sit on it, breathe on it, write on it if you have to. Then put one thing on the list and do it. Ask one person and let them say yes. Tape one drawing to whatever you use to keep food cold. Collect proof that you're still here. They told me I would fail as a single mother. They were right. Until I learned that love plus a plan beats shame plus a speech every single time. Until I learned that capes don't need wind. They need weight. Little arms around your neck, a head on your shoulder, a voice in the dark calling you what you already are. Mom.